It's amazing how people that we not even sure of their identity can walk, or should I say fly, right into history. And that's what we're talking about today, everyone. A gentleman known only as Dan or D.B. Cooper, who on November 24th, 1971, extorted over $200,000 in ransom. That would be equivalent to just over $1.25 million today, by hijacking Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 between Portland, Oregon and Seattle, Washington. Basically a 30-minute flight on which he was able to hijack and extort a huge ransom and then parachute into history and an enemy. We have no idea if he survived, if he spent the money. Let's just say that no trace of this gentleman has ever been found, though countless suspicions of who may actually have been or be D.B. Cooper have been abundant. What we know is he got away. It was Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, when a very nondescript Caucasian American gentleman, identifying himself as Dan Cooper, strolled into the Portland airport and up to ticket desk of Northwest Orient Airlines, buying a ticket for the 30-minute trip from Portland to Seattle on Flight 305, a Boeing 727. He approximately departed the airport with the plane at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and about 10 to 15 minutes into takeoff, roughly halfway through the flight, this very descript gentleman handed a note to the flight attendant by the name of Florence Schaefer and situated himself into his seat to sip on his drink, when the flight attendant did not give him any credence and situated herself into the jump seat, or a flight attendant seat, nearest him. He actually leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." It was a very neatly block printed in all capital letters with a felt tip pen or a magic marker, and it basically repeated the same thing. Florence did exactly as she was ordered by the note and got up and took a seat next to Mr. Cooper. And asked in a very low voice to see the bomb. He opened his briefcase long enough for her to glimpse and see some red cylinders attached in rows of 4 with some wires and red insulation and a large battery, enough to let her know that this could be potentially a dangerous device. And he stated his demands of $200,000 in American currency, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon arrival, because he had other plans for it and its crew. Florence immediately got up, went to the cockpit, and conveyed the instructions to the crew. The captain, William Scott, contacted Seattle Airport and spoke to air traffic control, which of course informed both Seattle, Washington State, and the FBI, as well as the flight administration, of what was going on. Now, this is in the early 70s, where you have to remember TSA was not a thing. Airport security was very, very lax. This gentleman was able to walk in, purchase a ticket at the counter, stroll through security, and make it to his gate on time, with very little examination of his carry-on, obviously. This entire time, Mr. Cooper was wearing dark sunglasses, so he was a very generic-looking gentleman. The other 35 passengers on the plane were told by the crew that the potential layover in Seattle would be extended because of minor mechanical difficulty to avoid any panic upon arrival. Northwest Orient's, which was later absorbed by one of the big boys, president authorized payment of the ransom and had it ready and waiting along with 4 parachutes at the Seattle airport. He also ordered the flight crew to obey all the hijackers' demands. But they did start to circle and delay their arrival at Seattle airport to allow federal and state law enforcement, as well as local, to mobilize at the airport. Of course, and to also arrive upon the cash and the parachutes and the fueling truck, everything else that they needed, and to allow emergency vehicles such as ambulance and fire trucks to assemble. While they were circling, another flight attendant by the name of Tina Mucklow recalled that Cooper appeared to be very familiar with Pacific Northwest territory, and actually pointed out that it looked like they were over Tacoma and getting close to their destination, even though they had reassured him they would have to delay the flight because of the task of getting everything mobilized for him. During the flight, the entire flight attendant crew noted that he was very calm, collected, wasn't erratic in any way, shape, or form. In fact, ordered another bourbon and paid for it with cash. Even though they refused to take payment, he then insisted that he take payment for it. Go figure. While this was going on, local law enforcement and the airline assembled 10,000 $20 bills with noted serial numbers and assembled together 4 military parachutes, sending a microfilm picture to the crew for Cooper to approve. He vetoed the military parachutes and instead wanted 4 civilian parachutes, which they then got from a local Seattle skydiving school. Just before 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Cooper was satisfied that all his demands had been met, and they landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. He told the pilots to taxi the airline to a kind of a parking offshoot section of the tarmac and wait, which they did. Northwest Orient's operations manager for the Seattle area, Al Lee, took off his airline uniform just in case he would be mistaken for law enforcement, and delivered the parachutes and the cash to the stairs, which one of the flight attendants brought up to Cooper. After he was satisfied, he released the other 35 passengers, as well as most of the flight attendants. Just after 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, they were refueled, and they again took off at toward clear airspace that the local FAA had cleared for them, and headed toward Mexico City, Mexico, which is what Cooper wanted. Once back in the air, Cooper began haggling with Captain Scott and the only flight attendant left on the plane, Miss Mucklow, about refueling at Reno for the journey on into Mexico, and he agreed that would be okay, and they diverted for Reno, turning down an offer from local FBI agents to meet with them at the airport. While they were circling over the Reno airport and getting close, Mucklow locked everyone into the cockpit, including herself, at the behest of Cooper. Upon entering it, she looked back long enough to see Cooper tying the money bag around his waist, fitting himself with one of the parachutes, and then locked herself in. A few minutes later, they got gauge indications of a change in pressure in the cabin, indicating one of the aft doors were open, and Cooper was gone, parachuting either to his death or to a life of freedom with the equivalent of $1.25 million in cash in today's currency. And from 1971 to 2016, several theories have been put forth during the very widespread investigation, where rewards of anywhere from $10,000 up to $25,000 have been offered for any information on who D.B. Cooper may have been. February 1980, an 8-year-old in the Vancouver, Washington area found some of the bills that were from the serial numbers given to Cooper. 2 packets of about $120 bills, but they were in very bad shape, which shows they had been in the elements a long time. But since then, that is literally the only indication of what may or may not have happened to Cooper. Several suspects have been put forth and have come forward, but none of them have ever been linked to him, as he was very, very good about wiping all of his fingerprints, wearing gloves, doing everything possible to avoid any sort of DNA or any other evidence on the plane. And that is the story. He has literally disappeared into thin air, into the Nevada desert, and into legend in a still unsolved hijacking. And until next time, keto and crime.